The car veered toward the shoulder, and the door flew wide as tires hissed on wet asphalt. Derek Cole said, "Go," and a trembling dog tumbled into the rain. The night smelled of oil and fear, as taillights smeared red across the slick road. Bruno staggered up, confused by the sudden cold and the roar of passing trucks. A horn blared and water fanned over him like a slap. Someone shouted, "Hey, watch it," but no one stopped. Bruno sniffed the gutter, found only a torn wrapper, and nudged it like a memory he could not keep. He limped toward the guardrail, heartbeat loud as thunder. A collar skidded near the curb and clinked like a severed promise. Derek Cole said, "Not my problem," and the car drifted away into the sodium haze. Bruno tried to follow and faltered, paws splayed, ribs rising like broken steps. He turned his face to the rain and howled, and the highway swallowed the sound as if it had practice. Dawn crawled in pale and tired, and Bruno found cover beneath a rusted stairwell behind a shuttered shop. A boy on a scooter slowed, stared, and rolled away without a word. A baker dragged bins to the curb and muttered, "Poor thing," then vanished into yeast and heat. Pigeons strutted like landlords and chased crumbs that were not there. Bruno pressed into the cold brick and watched the street yawn open. A bus wheezed to a stop and exhaled people with coffee steam halos. A woman pointed and said, "Someone should call," and her friend said, "Animal control will handle it." Bruno closed his eyes as wheels rattled on the grate. A siren sighed far off, and the sound felt like last night returning. He licked rain from his nose and pushed his ribs against the wall to feel something solid. The morning warmed, but his shiver stayed like a habit. By mid-morning the city turned brisk and busy, and indifferent shoes beat a bright rhythm around him. Courier said, "Move, buddy," and lifted his bike over the puddle like a ritual. A child tugged a sleeve and whispered. He looked scared and was steered away. A shopkeeper swept the sidewalk and sent a tide of gray water toward the gutter. Bruno edged back, ears dipped, and studied faces for a signal that never came. A man filmed for a moment and shrugged. Someone laughed at a joke not meant for this corner. Distant music skipped from a passing car and left a cheerful echo that felt wrong here. Bruno tested the street and returned to the wall as a horn snapped. The city did not mean harm, he thought, but it did not mean help either. Hunger arrived like a knock he could not ignore, so Bruno nosed toward a paper sack beside the trash. A feral dog slid from behind a dumpster, ribs like iron bars and eyes like glass. A low growl rose and braided with the rattle of cans. Bruno lowered his head and stepped back, and the other dog stepped forward with a stiff tail. A bottle rolled and cracked, and a window above snapped open. A voice barked, "Beat it," and the alley shuddered. The feral dog lunged and snapped air, daring a mistake. Bruno shifted, offered the space, and felt the old ache of giving ground. The sack split and oily fries tumbled into a rainbow slick. The other dog grabbed and fled, and Bruno stood still and counted his breaths until the echo was gone. Afternoon leaned toward a sallow gray, and Bruno reached the end of a block where the city met a thin park. Wind teased the grass into nervous waves. A jogger slowed, frowned, and kept moving. A woman on a bench said, "He needs help," and her companion said, "Not our mess." Bruno sniffed the breeze and found damp leaves, old bread, and the clean trace of water. He followed it to a fountain that sputtered like an apology. He drank until the ache softened and sat beneath a maple whose leaves clicked like soft coins. A siren rose and fell again, and his shoulders climbed and would not drop. He watched shadows lengthen, and they looked like doors closing. A streetlight bloomed and he flinched at the sudden gold, then breathed in and waited for the night to test him again. The morning sharpened as Bruno padded toward a deserted lot where weeds clawed through broken concrete. Hunger whispered and pushed him forward, and he found an overturned carton that smelled faintly of meat. He nosed inside, but only paper scraps and stale sauce clung to the edges. A crow cawed and leapt closer, daring him with black wings that flashed in the light. Bruno barked once, low and tired, then lowered his head again. His stomach knotted, and a dry whine escaped his throat. A truck rattled past and shook the fence, sending dust spiraling into the air. Bruno licked at the sauce, though it tasted of rust and smoke. A boy leaned over the fence, eyes wide, and whispered, "Hang on, buddy," before running off. Bruno stood frozen, wondering if those words meant anything. He sank back on his haunches, ribs aching against his skin, waiting for a kindness he did not trust. Bruno's mind drifted and painted fragments of a place that once smelled of grass and wood smoke. A memory stirred of running free, ears high, with laughter chasing him through open yards. He heard the echo of a voice calling his name like it mattered. The sound felt warm, but it burned because it was gone. He shook himself and stared at a puddle where the reflection broke into ripples. A man carrying groceries stopped and frowned. He muttered, "Not again," and crossed the street. Bruno sighed, the sound closer to a cough, and pressed his paws into the wet ground. A truck backfired, and he ducked instinctively. He wished the sound had been that call again, the one that promised he belonged. The day stretched longer with every beat of his heart, and still the promise stayed silent. Near the edge of a narrow alley, Bruno found another figure hunched in the shadows. An older mutt lifted his grizzled head and regarded him with eyes like worn amber. The dog shifted and said nothing, but silence itself felt like a lesson. Bruno stepped closer, tail low, and waited. The older mutt let out a slow breath and eased onto his belly, bones clicking as if carved by years. He looked at Bruno and seemed to say, "You endure by bending, not by breaking." A passerby tossed half a sandwich into the trash, and the older dog motioned with his gaze. Bruno followed, pulling scraps free, and laying one before the elder, before taking his own. They ate together under the drone of the city. Bruno felt for the first time that surviving did not mean being alone. While he lingered with the older mutt, a faint sound tugged his ears. From a crate near the alley mouth, a smaller creature whimpered, high and thin. Bruno approached slowly, paws measured, and saw a kitten shivering behind bent slats. Its fur clung in wet clumps, and its eyes darted like sparks of fear. Bruno lowered his head and exhaled softly. The kitten blinked, ears twitching, and curled tighter. A man passing by paused, frowned and muttered, "Damn shame," but kept walking. Bruno nosed closer, pressing gently until the crate shifted. Kitten trembled and released a squeak like glass breaking. Bruno lay down, tail still, and let his warmth seep into the space between them. The older mutt watched and nodded, a silent mark of approval. For a moment, the alley felt less cruel. Later that day, as the sky began to pale into evening light, Bruno drifted to a playground fence. Beyond, children ran and shouted, their voices bright as bells. One girl stopped and pointed, whispering, "Look at him," but her mother shook her head. Bruno pressed against the wire, his chest brushing the cold steel. He watched a dog on the other side chase a ball and return it joyfully to his boy. Bruno's heart pulled hard, an ache sharper than hunger. He pawed at the ground, and a small whine slipped free. The girl tugged her mother again, but the woman said, "Don't touch him." The ball rolled close to the fence, and for a blink Bruno imagined it was his. But the boy ran, grabbed it, and never noticed. Bruno sat still, framed in shadows, while the sun dipped lower, and the air grew heavy with loss. The afternoon cracked under the weight of hard footsteps as Derek Cole returned to the alley, eyes sharp with cold intent. He muttered, "Still here, mutt," and kicked a can against the wall. Bruno flinched, ribs rattling with the sound, but did not bolt. Derek's hand twitched with a leash still coiled from old days, and he smirked as though ownership still lingered. "You thought you'd get away," he sneered, his breath hot with anger. A bottle slipped from his grip and shattered, shards scattering like broken promises. Bruno stepped back, tail tucked, heart hammering. From the shadows, the older mutt growled low, a warning carved from years of pain. Derek lifted his boot but paused, scanning the dark corner where eyes burned back at him. He cursed and spat on the ground, muttering, "Not worth it," before storming away. Bruno's chest rose and fell fast, but in that silence he learned cruelty, still followed like a ghost. Twilight pressed in as Bruno darted from the alley into the edge of a crowded street, horns blaring as cars swerved. A sedan screeched and a woman shouted, "Watch out!" Bruno froze in the center, his paws trembling on hot pavement. A boy tugged his mother's arm, saying, "Help him," but she pulled him back. Tires smoked, and Bruno lunged toward the curb, claws scraping sparks from asphalt. He collapsed against a lamppost, sides heaving as the city pulsed indifferent around him. His chest rattled with fear, his throat dry from the taste of burned rubber. A man laughed nervously, shaking his head, "Crazy dog." Bruno closed his eyes against the blur of lights and sounds, and wished for quiet. Bruno staggered down an alley and collapsed near overflowing bins, ribs rising and falling like broken bellows. A shadow approached, not harsh but hesitant. Claire Matthews, a shelter worker with weary eyes, crouched low and whispered, "Easy now." She set down a paper sack, letting the scent of bread drift close. Bruno's ears twitched, torn between fear and hunger. Claire said softly, "No one's going to hurt you," though her voice cracked under the weight of doubt. Bruno sniffed the air, inching forward, then pulled back when her hand shifted. Claire sighed, pressing her palms to her knees, and sat still. The moment stretched, fragile and unbroken, until Bruno nudged the sack and tore a piece free. Claire smiled faintly, eyes damp with relief, as though she had caught the first spark of trust. A high-pitched whimper cut through the air, dragging Bruno's attention toward a crate under a sagging tarp. Inside, the kitten from before trembled, eyes wide and wet. Bruno nosed the tarp aside, his body tense but gentle. The kitten pressed back, fear etched deep in its tiny form. Bruno lowered himself and exhaled slow warmth, and the kitten leaned forward an inch. Claire murmured, "Another one," her voice heavy with sorrow. She opened her bag and laid down a soft cloth, coaxing the kitten out with care. Bruno nudged again, his muzzle brushing the edge of the crate, steady and calm. The kitten crept forward, claws tentative, and curled near Bruno's paw. For the first time, he let another's weight rest against him. Night fell heavy and unforgiving, the wind carrying hunger like a cruel tune. Bruno limped along a row of shuttered shops, the kitten tucked in his shadow. His stomach gnawed and his legs faltered, but he pressed forward. A vendor sweeping up muttered, "Strays everywhere," and turned away. The neon hum above flickered, painting the street in broken light. Bruno's paws scraped, each step an effort, yet he guided the kitten with a low chuck. He stopped by an empty stall, ribs shuddering with each breath, and sank to the ground. The kitten curled against him, eyes closing despite the cold. Bruno lowered his head and listened to the distant rumble of trains, each echo a reminder of places he could not reach. He closed his eyes and whispered to the dark with only silence answering. The night was restless, but memory struck sharper than the cold. Bruno dreamed of a leash once carried with pride, guiding a man through dark streets. He saw Derek Cole laughing, not cruel then, but warm, a sound he once ran toward. The memory blurred when laughter cracked into anger, and Bruno felt the sting of boot and leash reversed as punishment. His scar burned like fire, waking him. He rose trembling, the kitten pressed close, and stared into the empty street. A voice from nowhere whispered in his bones, "You were not worthless." Bruno shook the thought, as if it were rain clinging to fur. The ache of betrayal carved deeper than hunger, but hidden within it was proof he had once been loved. And if he had been loved before, maybe the world could grant it again. Later that morning, Claire Matthews appeared again, her breath clouding in the chill. She crouched with a can of food and murmured, "I'm still here." Bruno hesitated, ears twitching, his scarred leg aching. Claire kept her eyes lowered, voice steady though her hands shook. "You don't have to run," she whispered, pushing the can closer. Bruno sniffed, nose brushing metal, then licked once before stepping back. Claire sighed, her expression caught between hope and fear. She left the can and pulled back, whispering, I'll be here tomorrow too. Bruno lowered his head, torn by hunger and mistrust. The kitten crept forward, tiny paws tapping, and nibbled first. Claire's eyes softened as tears welled. In that fragile moment, a crack opened in the wall Bruno had built. The older mutt emerged again, his steps slow but eyes bright with knowledge. He settled near Bruno, their shoulders nearly touching. The alley was quiet, except for their breaths mingling in the chill. Bruno watched as the elder dog closed his eyes, content despite the scars across his muzzle. The mentor turned his head slightly as though to say, "The world hurts, but trust can heal." Bruno exhaled and pressed his body a little closer. Claire noticed and whispered, "You listen to each other." The kitten curled between them, a bridge of warmth in the cold. The mentor raised his head high, ears forward, and barked once, steady and deep. The sound carried like a vow. Bruno's chest lifted, and though fear still clung, the seed of courage stirred within. Evening fell and brought a storm, sheets of rain hammering rooftops. Bruno shielded the kitten beneath a broken awning, but hunger gnawed worse than cold. Across the street, Derek Cole returned, his shadow stretched under lightning. "Still following me, mutt?" he snarled. Bruno tensed, body low, teeth bared though his legs shook. Derek lifted a stick and waved it with menace, stepping closer. Claire burst from the alley shouting, "Stop!" Her voice rang above the thunder. Derek spat, "This stray's worthless," raising his arm. Bruno growled, a sound deep and raw, not fear but defiance. The storm roared, and time seemed to hold its breath as betrayal and loyalty clashed. The storm eased, but the moment left its mark. Derek vanished into the night with curses echoing. Bruno collapsed near Claire's feet, sides heaving. She knelt, hand hovering before daring to touch his damp fur. "You're safe now," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Bruno flinched but did not pull away. The kitten climbed onto his back, purring faintly, a fragile sound against the fading thunder. The mentor mutt stood nearby, lifting his muzzle skyward, eyes reflecting the last flash of lightning. Claire's tears mingled with rain as she said, "I won't let him hurt you again." Bruno's eyes closed, but his chest rose slower, steadier, as trust began to root. The night pressed heavy, the streets slick with storm's aftermath, when Derek Cole returned with rage burning in his eyes. He carried a length of chain coiled like a weapon and spat, "You thought you could defy me?" Bruno stiffened, hackles high, heart racing as the kitten whimpered under the awning. Claire stepped in front of them, her voice shaking but firm, "Leave him alone." Derek laughed, cruel and sharp, "This mutt's nothing but trash." The mentor mutt growled, standing tall beside Bruno, scars glowing like metals in the lamplight. Bruno's chest heaved, torn between fear and fury, but then the sound of Claire's trembling whisper cut through, "You're not his anymore." Derek swung the chain, metal sparking against pavement, but Bruno lunged forward, teeth bared, defiance alive. The clash was no longer about survival. It was about dignity reclaimed. The chain cracked against stone as Derek struck, sparks flashing, but Bruno dodged with a burst of strength. He circled, teeth snapping in the air, chest rattling with a growl that thunder could not drown. Derek roared, swinging again, but this time Bruno lunged low, knocking him off balance. Claire gasped, clutching her chest as Derek staggered and cursed. The mentor barked deep, echoing like a drum beat of encouragement. Derek stumbled backward into the gutter, shoes splashing dirty water, and spat, "You'll regret this." Bruno stood firm, chest puffed, tail stiff, as rain dripped from his muzzle. He no longer looked like a victim, but a defender of all that still breathed near him. The kitten peered out, tiny eyes glowing with fragile hope as the storm of cruelty began to break. Bruno pressed forward, heart pounding, each step a claim against years of fear. Derek backed away, breathing ragged, chains slipping from his grip. "You were mine," he hissed, voice shaking more than strong. Claire shouted, "He belongs to no one," her voice breaking into the rain. Bruno growled low, the sound steady as stone, as he planted himself between Derek and the fragile lives behind him. The mentor leaned closer, shoulder brushing Bruno's, a gesture of solidarity carved from pain and time. Derek's eyes widened, not from power, but from realization. This battle was lost. He spat again, retreating into the shadows, his steps hollow with defeat. Bruno exhaled, body trembling, and looked back at Claire. For the first time, trust flickered like light in his eyes. The fight's echo lingered as silence fell, broken only by dripping rain. Bruno staggered, body heavy, legs shaking as adrenaline ebbed. Claire rushed forward, kneeling at his side, whispering, "You were brave, so brave." She reached to touch his soaked fur. And this time he did not flinch. The kitten climbed onto his back, pressing warmth into his shivering form. The mentor mutt raised his muzzle, releasing one long howl that rang against the empty streets, a song of victory and mourning. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, her breath trembling. "You're safe with me now." Bruno's gaze softened, scar catching the streetlight, and though pain still clung, dignity had returned. The night had broken him, but also rebuilt him stronger. As dawn cracked the horizon, Bruno lay against Claire's side, the world painted in pale gold. She whispered, "The worst is over," though both knew scars remained. The kitten purred softly, its sound steady as a heartbeat. The mentor stood nearby, his eyes reflecting peace for the first time in years. Bruno lifted his head, eyes weary, but filled with new light. He looked at Claire, and with trembling trust, nudged her hand. Claire smiled through tears, whispering, "You're family now." The weight of betrayal no longer chained him, dignity had been reclaimed in the night's fire. The city stirred awake, but for Bruno, a new life had begun. Claire led Bruno into her modest apartment, the smell of soap and warm bread clinging to the air. Bruno froze at the doorway, paws hovering over the welcome mat, unsure of the change. Claire whispered, "It's safe, I promise," her voice a soft anchor against the city's noise. The kitten darted forward, eager, nose twitching at the scent of home. Bruno's ribs trembled with hesitation, memories of closed doors and harsh voices pulling him back. Claire knelt low, hand steady, waiting without demand. "Come on, boy," she murmured, hope threading through her words. Bruno stepped inside at last, claws clicking softly on wood, the sound strange yet gentle. The mentor mutt lingered at the door, eyes reflecting years of roads walked, before turning his head toward the night. Bruno glanced back once, as though to thank him, and found the courage to settle on the rug, heart still beating wild. Later that night, Claire placed a bowl of food near the rug, steam curling into the dim light. Bruno sniffed cautiously, eyes flicking from bowl to Claire. She whispered, "It's yours, no one will take it," then sat back, giving him space. The kitten bounced forward, nipping at crumbs, then retreated, letting Bruno choose. Hunger twisted his body, but trust twisted harder. Slowly, he lowered his head, tongue lapping the warm meal as if testing its truth. Claire exhaled in relief, pressing her palm against her chest as her lips trembled into a smile. Bruno's eyes lifted briefly to her face, catching the shine of her tears, before returning to the bowl. It wasn't just food. It was a promise of safety. And for the first time, his body eased as he ate without fear of a blow or a chain. As rain tapped the windows, Bruno curled on a blanket Claire spread across the rug. The kitten nestled against his chest, purring like a steady drum. Claire sat nearby, notebook open, scribbling while stealing glances at the dog whose presence filled her quiet space. She whispered, "You're safe here," though Bruno's ears twitched as if unsure. His body remained tense, paws shifting in sleep as shadows of the past pulled at him. A sudden car horn outside jolted him upright, breath ragged, eyes wide. Claire reached quickly, but then froze, letting him breathe, letting him choose. He lowered slowly, chest easing, and pressed his head onto the blanket again. The kitten stretched, paw touching his scarred muzzle, grounding him in the present. Claire's eyes softened, watching trust weave itself one fragile thread at a time. The mentor returned briefly at dawn, standing in the open doorway as light spilled across the floor. His eyes found Bruno, who rose slowly and stepped forward, torn between two worlds. The kitten mewed, tugging him back toward warmth. Claire stood behind, whispering, "You don't have to choose," though her voice trembled with fear he would. The mentor lowered his head, a slow nod of pride, as if saying his lessons were complete. Bruno exhaled and pressed nose to the mentor's fur, a silent thank you etched in touch. The older mutt barked once, low and steady, before stepping back into the morning mist. Bruno stood in the doorway watching him fade, then turned toward Claire and the kitten. His paws carried him inside, the sound steady and sure. For the first time, belonging felt possible. The day stretched forward, quieter than storms past, as Bruno curled near the window, sunlight painting his fur gold. The kitten chased a thread, Claire dangled, tiny leaps, filling the room with laughter. Claire sat nearby with tea in hand, her voice soft as she said, "This is home now." Bruno lifted his head, eyes catching hers, and for the first time, there was no shadow in them. His scar still marked him, but it no longer defined him. He yawned wide, stretching before lowering his head onto the rug with a sigh of peace. The kitten pounced gently against his side, and he did not flinch. Claire smiled, her tears gone, replaced by quiet joy. Outside, the city moved fast, but within these walls time softened. Bruno closed his eyes and drifted into rest, no longer a stray, but a soul learning to heal. The first morning, in true safety, arrived with light that felt softer than any before. Bruno stretched across the rug, his breath calm, while Claire knelt beside him with a hand resting lightly on his head. She whispered, "You're home now," the words falling like balm over wounds too long carried. The kitten tumbled across the floor, chasing the curve of shadow, pausing to curl against Bruno's chest. Outside, the city roared and hurried, but here the world slowed into quiet grace. Bruno closed his eyes halfway, not from fear but peace, and let himself rest without guarding every sound. For Claire, this moment was everything, a life saved, and in saving it, her own heart healed. Later that day, Claire opened the door to let fresh air drift in. Bruno padded forward, hesitant but curious, gazing out onto the world that once cut him deep. The kitten peeked from behind his leg, tiny eyes wide. Claire said softly, "You'll never walk those streets alone again." Bruno sniffed the breeze, memories flickering, yet the leash in Claire's hand was not a chain, but a bond of choice. He pressed his nose against her palm before stepping outside. For the first time, he felt the ground not as an enemy, but as a road toward hope. The park shimmered with families and sunlight, laughter ringing in the air. Bruno trotted beside Claire, leash loose, body steady. The kitten rode nestled in a small sling across Claire's chest, its eyes blinking at the colors of life. Children pointed, whispering, "Look at that dog," but their words carried admiration instead of fear. Bruno's ears twitched, but no longer bent in shame. He walked tall, each step rewriting a story once carved by pain. Claire said softly, "You're part of something bigger now," her hand brushing his head as they moved together. The world that once hurt him now opened like a field of light. That evening, Claire sat on her porch with tea, while Bruno lay at her feet, the kitten curled between his paws. The air smelled of rain-washed earth, the sky burning orange with sunset. Bruno raised his head to meet her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, and a bond carved through survival. Claire whispered, "We saved each other," her voice catching with quiet emotion. Bruno exhaled deeply, tail tapping once, a gesture small yet profound. The kitten purred, its sound rising like a hymn against the hush of dusk. In that moment, their little world was whole. Night returned, but it no longer brought fear. Bruno curled on Claire's bed, the kitten snuggled at his side, while Claire dimmed the lamp and whispered, "Good night, family." Bruno closed his eyes, his breath slow, his body free from chains of the past. The scar on his muzzle glimmered faintly, not as a wound but as proof of survival. Claire lay down nearby, heart steady, knowing they had built something lasting. The city outside sighed and moved, but within this room, peace lingered like a final gift. The story of pain had ended, and the story of love had only begun.